Hey guys, it's Mr. Mini Painter and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I painted the Oathmaker from the Middle-earth strategy battle game Lord of the Rings by Games Workshop. Now he is a tiny character who has about 2 seconds of view time in one of the movies where he swears an oath to Saruman, so his forces will help him in joining the good cause. Well, anyway, I like this character and he's kind of a leader of his clan, so let's see how I painted this guy. Alright, so let's get to painting. Now if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing to the channel and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you and your results, of course. So what I did before I started is prime the model in a light grey primer and add some modeling sand to the base. I like to always do that in advance because it's easier than to do it afterwards and mess up the shoes or the legs or whatever you have painted and spend hours of your precious time on, and then only to mess it up while painting a base. So for all the flesh tones, I'm using Night Questor flesh here, which is just the hands and the face, the tiny part of the face. There's a lot of hair and beard going on. We're gonna make him kind of grim looking. I'm adding some screamer pink in his open screaming mouth. We're gonna darken that down later on, but I wanted to have a different tone than either skin tone or black. Next I'm washing the skin with Druchii Violet to add some purple tones to the skin tone. You can use some reds if you want, or maybe a Reikland flesh shade. First highlight stage is done with Cadian flesh tone. And with this I'm picking up most of the skin, focusing on the top parts of the skin, so the fingers, the knuckles, the nose, the eyebrows, the forehead, etc. Leaving only the deeper areas of the skin with the previous base color. And the second highlight is done with some Kislev flesh. Now with this I usually first line out the most obvious parts, the top parts that would reflect the most light would be the most prominent, and afterwards kind of thin down my paint and blend the darker and brighter color together by pulling the paint from the darkest towards the brightest part. It requires a lot of patience. I painted in the eyes with Palette Witch flesh. Be very careful when doing so. If you went too far with this or painted too much, just tip over it again with the base color. Then some pupils with Abaddon Black. Try and make him look dark and grim. There are some great examples on the internet for painting eyes. For me, I'm always happy to even get that dot in the middle at all. Next up, Karak Stone for the teeth. It's a very tiny detail, but it's so much fun when it works. So I try and paint in this detail here. Then the base color for the hair I did with Rhinox hide. Now he's a hairy guy, there's a lot of hair here. Be careful with the beard though, because it covers a lot of his face and you don't want to touch those tiny parts of skin that you want to be visible. Now this next bit might seem a bit unconventional, and of course you can use Null if you want, but I chose Black Templar. Mainly because it's more intense, more dark, and I wanted this hair to be really dark with just a tiny tone of brown in it. And the benefit of using this method is that you can highlight it with the original color, Rhinox hide again, which is what we're gonna do. And of course you can do that with Null Oil as well, but I like the effect on this one, and that it's really grimy and dark looking. So highlight the original hair and the strands of hair with Rhinox hide as best as you can. Leave the dark shining through as much as possible. And for the next part, I'm mixing some Dawnstone in the Rhinox hide. We're gonna gray him out a little bit. Just pick out the tips of those strands of hair. Focus on the top of his head, of course, and the front. And just pick out some details like this. Make sure you have a fine-tipped brush when doing so. Next up, Thondia Brown for the majority of his clothing. So it's the sleeves, the skirt, this is a skirt. Below, he's wearing a kind of a scarf around his left shoulder, so leave that as it is for now. So paint all around it. And he's got some bands on his underarms, which we're going to be painting later on. Also the armor, kind of armor plate on his chest, I painted with the same base color. We're going to highlight it a little bit differently. Next, some dried bark mixed with some Abaddon black on his wristbands. I used about a 50-50 mix ratio to do this, and the plus side is that you can again highlight it with the original pure color, being dried bark this time. Next, I'm using some Cygor Brown to paint the band around his waist, and I did it in 2 phases because it didn't really give a nice coverage, but I wanted to have some different shade options as if it were. The nice thing about contrast paints is that it instantly creates dark and brighter areas. Next, on Agrok Sword Shade, I'm shading the entire cloth we painted before with Thondia Brown, so the majority of the suit again. To get some nice shades in there. You can go fairly dark. Don't overdo it, you don't want any puddles of shades, which is always the problem with shades, I think. If you use too much, it kind of piles up in a corner, and you get this blob that you don't want. Now the scarf, let's call it a scarf, I painted with Deathcore Drab mixed with some Abaddon Black. And again, we're going to be highlighting that with the original color. So this is a beautiful way to start. And I think it's very true to the original box art cover. I used the same mixture of Deathcore Drab and Abaddon Black on his pants, which we're also going to be highlighting differently later on. Next up, some Karak Stone as a base color for the skulls hanging around his waist, and some bones. And then we're almost done with the base colors. I used Baneblade Brown to paint the bands around his arms, and it's supposed to be kind of like a furry look. So first I took care of all the particular lines as they are, and next thing I did is, because you wanted to have a kind of a furry look, is, and I'm going to show you in detail later on, is hold your brush sideways. So if the line is horizontal, hold your brush vertical and try and pull with a single piece of hair of your brush some tiny strokes. So you want you to have your paint thin but not too thin because it's going to be runny, and try and pull those, as you can see here, the tip of your brush, maybe 1 or 2 hairs only, towards the brightest parts. And that way you get some tiny lines in there which suggests it's a furry look. It's a very clever detail. Then Doomble Brown and Rhinox Hide I used to cover the cloth, which gives it a bit more of a red look, red leathery look. Leave those dark areas as they are and just focus on the upper parts. For the chest armor I'm using pure Doomble Brown. and only as an edge highlight, but just to make it stand out a little bit more than the rest. And if you want to make it look worn, for example, just a little bit more of a worn look, you can use a stipple effect on those chest armor, just to make it stand out a little bit more. Dried bark I used for the bands around his leg, and also the boots. Now, I tend to go back and forth in how to approach painting a model. At one time I would do all base colors first and then continue on the washes, the oils, and then the highlights, for example, and then the fine details. And sometimes, for example, what I did with the face here is to just finish one part and then continue to the next part. I think it really depends on the model you paint, which is the preferred method, and of course your own preparation in doing so. Then some non-oil here on the skulls, just to add some shades and darken them down. And I do the same on the wristbands. Also cover that with a bit of Abaddon, null oil. Then also some Agrax Earthshade for some brown tones in there. Next up, pure Deathcore Drab, which we're gonna be highlighting the scarf and the pants just above his boots. With the pants, we're just doing some regular highlight lines here and there. With the scarf, I'm gonna do something different. I'm gonna add some horizontal lines like this. They don't have to be extremely tiny, we'll get there in the next step. But for this, with pure Deathcore Drab, just add some lines here and there, which will create kind of a woven look. And we're going to emphasize that with some Deathworld Forest, which is a brighter variant. And we're going to try and paint lines as fine as we can. So just with a strain of hair, the very tip of your brush. Don't overload your brush with paint for this particular thing. And just add some tiny lines there, which makes it look like it's a woven scarf. Then with some XV88, I'm painting in the rings or the strings, I don't really know what they are, in between the chest armor. You can hold your brush sideways like this, just to pick them out any way you prefer. You can, if you have a very fine tip, use the tip of your brush just to pick him out. When painting a mini, it's all about how secure you feel doing anything. I also picked out some of the details on the belt with the same color. Then back to dried bark for the strap around his body, holding the bones there and his armor probably. Pure dried bark. Now, if you want, you can shade it down. I thought it was dark enough and a big enough of a difference between the majority of the cloth. And I highlighted that with some Baneblade brown. I tried to create a very, very thin line to this belt around his waist, just to make it look a little bit more interesting and make it stand out a little bit more towards the rest of the clothing. Then some Karak stone was used on the top of the skull and the bones to highlight it. I'll leave those shades nice and dark, so just focus on the outsides and the top of the skull. And next some Screaming Skull, and decrease the area you're painting to create an extra extreme highlight. What really characterizes this model, of course, is his blade, because that's what he uses to make his oath, the Oathmaker. So lead belcher for the base color of the metal. It's just a tiny blade, but it's a significant thing in the movies. Now the back of the blade I painted with some Corvus black, which is basically a dark gray. I didn't really want that to catch a lot of attention, so I just used a black tone. Just pick out that tiny detail. And next highlight that with some administratum gray or ashen gray or whatever kind of bright gray you want. I then washed the metal with Nuln Oil. And then of course we're gonna go for some sharpness. And to do so I'm using Stormhost Silver, just focusing on the top of the blade and the bottom of the blade. The top because it would catch the most light, and the bottom because of course it probably would be the sharpest part of this blade. And then the final detail, blood. And I used blood for the Blood God, which is a technical paint and really nice in how you can use it. It's very thick, it stays in place, and I tried to add some extra details. So of course the bloody sharp edge on the bottom, but try and speckle some tiny spicks of blood on there as well. Now you can really splash it on there if you want, but just hold a piece of paper behind it so you won't ruin the model. And as a tiny detail, I made a tiny stream of blood coming out of his fist. He's clenching his fist together. He has just sworn to Saruman that his brethren will join his battle and the good cause of Saruman. So I wanted to have a little blood come from his hand. It's not really visible because it's on the bottom side of his fist, but I think it's a nice tiny detail. The base I painted with Garagak Sewer, which is my go-to base tone for painting sandy surfaces. I really love how this turns out and looks like a foresty, dark earth look. And that's it for the Oathmaker. And there's our finalized Oathmaker. Tabletop ready, good to go, with bloody knife and bloody fist, screaming to join the forces of Saruman. I hope this video was of any help to you guys, and if it was, please consider subscribing and leave a comment below, and as always I will be replying to all of them, and I love to hear from you. For now, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in one of my next videos. Bye bye!